Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Peter Alexander here in Washington as the presidential campaign enters a new stage after that historic verdict. A jury finding former President Donald Trump, the presumptive Republican presidential nominee, guilty on 34 felony counts of falsifying business records, making him the first American president ever convicted of a crime. Judge Juan Merchan scheduled Mr. Trump's sentencing for July 11th. That's just 4 days before the start of the Republican National Convention. Just ahead, we're going to dive into what is next in the legal process for the former president who has vowed to appeal the conviction. But today we do want to begin with the politics of this moment and what it means for the presidential race that has been essentially frozen by this trial for weeks. In the 23 hours since the verdict was handed down, we have seen Republicans rally behind the former president as both he and his allies rail against the verdict and attack the fundamentals of the American justice system. This morning, at what the campaign billed as a post-verdict news conference, Mr. Trump didn't take any questions. Instead, he delivered a feisty and rambling speech. He aired his grievances, again, baselessly called the trial rigged, attacked the judge, a key witness, and President Biden, and criticized everything from the situation on the southern border to both of the impeachment inquiries against him. He also repeatedly made false claims that his prosecution was a targeted political effort.
It all comes out of the White House. Crooked Joe Biden, the worst president in the history of our country. He's the worst president in the history of our country, the most incompetent. He's the dumbest president we've ever had. We're losing our country. And I really think that this is an event, what took place yesterday with this judge. Look, we have conflicted, but he's a crooked judge, and you'll understand that. And I say that knowing that it's very dangerous for me to say that, and I don't mind. We're dealing with a corrupt government. We have a corrupt country. Our elections are corrupt. Our borders are open. Our borders are going to be closed very soon. November 5th is going to be the most important day in the history of our country.
It's important to note that what Mr. Trump is saying there is not true. The charges in this case were not brought by President Biden. This was a New York case. He was indicted by a New York grand jury, and elections in the United States are safe. They are secure, and the verdict was rendered not by a judge, but by a Manhattan jury. Today's remarks came after some of Mr. Trump's top supporters and vice presidential hopefuls also attacked the verdict, as well as the justice system.
This is the weaponization of the justice system against their political opponent. This is a justice system that hunts Republicans while protecting Democrats. This was certainly a hoax, a sham. This was devastating for the average American watching it.
This is the most outrageous travesty I've ever seen. And the problem here is Democrats have crossed this line. They have crossed the line in which now the court system is a political weapon. And it's going to be very hard for it not to come back the other way.
I would not live in New York State right now. Absolutely, I wouldn't, Wolf, because what New York has showed and what, frankly, the Biden administration has showed is that if you don't do exactly what they want you to do in politics, they will try to use our system, bipartisan system of law and order, to throw you in prison. I think that what happened in New York, if you applied it across all 50 states, would be the definition of fascism. Throwing your political opponents in jail. Thank God it only happened in New York and not in the rest of the country.
Again, to be clear, the verdict in this case was reached by an impartial jury selected in part by Donald Trump's legal team. There is no evidence the American justice system protects members of one political party over another. At the White House this afternoon, President Biden addressed the verdict for the first time while responding to former President Trump and his allies' attacks on the justice system.
After careful deliberation, the jury reached a unanimous verdict. They found Donald Trump guilty on all 34 felony counts. Now he'll be given the opportunity, as he should, to appeal that decision just like everyone else has that opportunity. That's how the American system of justice works. And it's reckless, it's dangerous, it's irresponsible for anyone to say this was rigged just because they don't like the verdict.
Big picture here, it is impossible to say at this moment what impact this verdict and its reaction is going to have on the race between President Biden and former President Trump. But for a race that has remained so static for so long, this historic verdict and the reaction from President Trump and his allies could be finally the one thing that shakes things up a bit here. And joining us now is our team of reporters. Dasha Burns is outside Trump Tower there in Midtown Manhattan. Shaq Brewster is on the ground in the key battleground state of Wisconsin, getting voters' reactions to the verdict. And with me on set here, NBC White House correspondent Mike Memley and NBC's chief political analyst Chuck Todd. We'll get to our friends here on set in a moment. Dasha, let me get to you outside Trump Tower. You were there for the news conference earlier. The former president spoke for approaching an hour, didn't take any questions, even though, of course, this was billed as a news conference. How do you characterize what you heard?
Yeah, Peter, a bit surprised that he didn't take any questions. Normally, he loves engaging with the media, but in this case, just a straight speech. It really felt to me a bit like a campaign-style speech. He was lashing out at President Biden, at the trial itself, at the judge, at DA Bragg, and even lashed out at Michael Cohen, who, of course, is a witness in this case. And the question is, will there be a gag order violation because of that? But he really took that, almost hour to defend himself, to also talk about his priorities like immigration, like the economy. He also claimed that he did want to testify himself, but said he didn't because of risk of perjuring himself or, getting in trouble for something else potentially, because he would be open to other kinds of questioning if he were to take the stand. He also, Peter, touted his fundraising. The campaign tells us that in the hours between the verdict becoming public and midnight last night, that they raised $34.8 million through digital fundraising, which is a significant number, and they're pointing to that as evidence that his supporters are rallying around him, Peter.
Yeah, so obviously we can't validate any of those numbers at this point, but certainly it did motivate Donald Trump's base here. As you speak privately to his aides and his allies right now, how concerned are they about what this verdict could mean for the campaign? It has been a hypothetical until now, but independents, including some Trump supporters, said it would make them less likely to support Donald Trump.
Well, they're remaining pretty defiant, and I think you may have seen Eric Trump's post on social media saying that, May 30th is the day that will be remembered as the day that former President Trump won the election. They are thinking along those lines, like they believe that this is going to be helpful to him politically, even if it's harmful legally, and because they've seen those bumps in the polls, those bumps in fundraising anytime he has been under indictment or has faced these legal troubles. And they are going to be, as they have been, Peter, campaigning on this. It may have worked better in the primary, but they're not shying away from leaning into the message that he is a political prisoner, as some of his fundraising messages have said recently.
Yeah, notable that they call him a political prisoner because there has been no sentence and he may not ever serve time behind bars, but they can frame it however they prefer right now if it helps juice the base, right? That's the strategy. Let's get to Mike Memley. He's on set here. You've been keeping a close eye on what's going on at the White House, talking to Biden aides and allies, specifically those in the campaign. What's been striking is the way that they sort of frame this. As one told you, it's better than an acquittal, but this is not going to be a central message.
What's so interesting, Peter, is of the two campaigns, it seems like it's the Biden campaign. Unusual to say, that is more relieved that the trial is over than the person who was actually on trial, right? And that's because, to put it mildly, there's not a playbook for how to handle a campaign when your opponent is facing a criminal trial. They were struggling in some ways, not just with getting their own message out during the coverage of this case, but also with the calibration of what, if anything, to say about the case itself. So now that this is over, now that this is in the rearview mirror, the campaign is looking ahead to next month's debate as a moment to finally crystallize the choice for voters. And so you're not going to hear the campaign talking every day about maybe a criminal convict, right, a convicted felon in their political opponent. They're going to get back to the bread and butter issues that they say voters do want to hear about. They're going to try and also, and I think we saw this with the president's remarks today, build up that stature gap between the incumbent president, the person holding the office, the person who is working for American people, versus the candidate who is only interested in himself, only focused on grievance. In some ways, everything Trump has done since the verdict has played into the strategy that they're unfolding, but now they have to execute.
And again, you talk about that debate, the first of two to take place on June 27th there. In a lot of ways, these debates are performative, right? And for Joe Biden, that is a real challenge, a performative debate going up for an hour and a half against Donald Trump right there. Whether you agree or disagree with him, the guy demonstrates his vigor when he speaks at these news conferences here. How much concern is there about that? they say they got time to make up for a flub if there were to be one, but that is fundamentally a challenge for him.
I mean, you know this so well, Peter. The president, his team rely so much on preparation for his big speeches and for big moments like this debate. And he has a very big month ahead. He's going to be overseas. You'll be traveling with him to Europe. He's got a lot of...
overseas twice.
Twice, 2 trips in just as many weeks. He has a other busy schedule of events, a lot of engagements coming up. And so finding the time, when we know incumbent presidents often struggle in that first debate. Just look at what Barack Obama faced when he faced Mitt Romney in 2012. That was a big stumble. And so I think the concern now is, will he have enough time to prepare? But the Biden advisors have said to me, prep is overrated, especially with this opponent. They know each other so well. They faced each other before, and they know the game plan going into it.
They hope it crystallizes the choice, as you said. That's the key. That's why they like the idea of this happening in June. They know they need to shake things up. Shaq, let's get to you. You're in Kenosha County, the great state of Wisconsin. This is a county that Donald Trump narrowly won in 2016 and again in 2020. Yeah. What are voters there saying? Both sides, if there's anything they agree on, Donald Trump and Joe Biden, it's that voters get to have the final say.
Right, Peter. You're talking about voters in a battleground county in this battleground state. And since that verdict was announced, I've had at least about 24 conversations in Kenosha. And some takeaways that I'm sensing at this point. Number one, this is news that is breaking through. There were several people who said that they don't follow the news, but they got a text about this in their group chat, or they saw on TikTok or Instagram at least that headline. They know about the 34 counts in which Donald Trump has now been convicted of, even if they don't know exactly what those counts represent or what the alleged crime was in this case. And because of that, largely because of that, it's largely reinforcing how many people view Donald Trump as a candidate. If you didn't like him, if you were going to vote for Biden, then you thought he was guilty before this trial. This didn't really influence them. And if you were siding with Donald Trump, then you're now still siding with Donald Trump after this trial, largely based on my conversations. Just listen to a sample of those conversations I've been having. Does this impact or alter at all how you view Donald Trump?
Absolutely not.
How does that change anything for you in how you view Donald Trump?
I mean, I didn't like him in the first place, so that's about it.
So this doesn't change much?
No.
Let's just say right now, if the election were tomorrow, how do you think you would vote?
I'd probably still vote Trump over Biden.
Despite you having pause over the convictions?
Yeah.
Why is that?
I don't feel like Biden's a good enough candidate, and I feel like obviously his old age should be something a factor.
There could be two sides of the story, and that's all. But that's why I choose to not see the news, be a part of it. I stay away because it really gets really tricky.
Yeah. I didn't take offense to what she said in that last statement there, but I think, you know, with one thing that she revealed to me, she voted for Joe Biden in 2020 and is now going to Donald Trump. She said that even though this may give her some pause, it's not a determining factor. Instead, she's thinking more about the struggle she had buying a home, and she thinks about gas prices. Those are the things she's saying that she's making an election decision on in November, and that's ultimately what's going to be the deciding factor for her. And that's a message that you hear repeated in a lot of the conversations I've been having here in Kenosha, Peter.
Yeah, Shaq, tell her no offense taken by the comments about not watching the news. A lot of people tuned some of this out lately. I get it. Let me ask what other correspondents are seeing elsewhere. They're crisscrossing the country. What are voters telling them there? Are we hearing different messages from voters in different parts of the U.S.?
It's largely the same, and we kind of put together a piece on this for NBCNews.com. I mean, we're talking about 40 or more than 40 conversations between all of our teams. I apologize for the car. Hope you can still hear me, but it's largely the same messaging. The voters in different places, talking about Arizona, Georgia, Wisconsin, are reflecting, and this conviction is reinforcing how they already viewed these candidates. It's one of those questions of what will ultimately make a decision. It's not to say that they don't care about what ultimately happened, but this isn't something that, at least based on the early surface, the early read of what we've been hearing, is not fundamentally changing the dynamics of this race.
Yeah, just thinking about Wisconsin, you know, it's basically the population that you could fit into Badger Stadium that could decide this election, not just in that state, but frankly around the country right now. We're joined by a football fan and friend of mine, Chuck Todd, for some of the takes on this. I just want your sort of gut reaction to what we saw yesterday and the way we're already seeing the sides sort of break down in terms of their way of framing it.
Look, I sort of view this way. The campaign that's talking about the trial is losing. Okay, the more you talk about this trial, the more you're losing with the voters you need to win. Why do I say that? First of all, there's plenty of evidence to back this up. I can take you back to the Bill Clinton impeachment in 1998. Republicans thought for sure running against Monica Lewinsky was going to be a winner for them. It was not. Voters were like, guess what? We
care about our lives.
Not only that, we already knew this about Bill Clinton. We factored his character into our decision to vote for him in 1992. Access Hollywood tape. Everybody's going, how can Republicans be rallying around Trump so easily this time? Well, fool them once, shame on you, right? Fool you twice. Well, Access Hollywood tape, the Republican Party walked away from him, but voters did. And that's why I think this trial is not going to have an impact, because for the same reason the Clinton impeachment had no impact. Voters knew Trump's moral failings before, and they voted for him anyway. People would even say it. You heard it in some of that sound that Shaq had. So I think if you're relying on this, whether you're Trump and think it's a grievance thing is a good idea, you're going to turn off the middle. And if you're Biden and you run on it too much, you celebrate too much. Look, this is a sad day for America. Hard stop. Shouldn't be any celebrate. If you're celebrating, you're part of the problem. This is why this country is being ripped apart. He brought this on himself. That's also a fact, too, at the end of the day. Let the legal world debate whether Alvin Bragg should have brought this or not. I think there's a lot of evidence that Alvin Bragg has still been the best thing for Trump's campaign. Without the Alvin Bragg indictment, I think Donald Trump has a much harder time in the primaries. It's just a fact of when that indictment happened was at a moment that Trump desperately needed something to rally Republicans around him. So it is, in that sense, it has been weirdly helpful to him up until this point. But if you're talking about it, I think the mistake would be what Trump's doing now, trying to make it part of his campaign.
You saw that news conference today, and Dasha said it felt like it was political, a campaign speech. That's all there is a campaign speech, and this is what it sounds like.
And here's the thing. The voters are going to punish whatever candidate is not talking about the issues that they want to talk about. This is why I think the democracy message is not working for Biden. If you care about the democracy, you've already made your decision who you're voting for. The voters that are left are the voters that are going, I want to buy a house. It's too expensive. Or I'm really frustrated by this, or I'm frustrated by that. They're looking forward. Campaigns that relitigate the past are destined for failure. So I think that's the way you got to look at this. I think we may see a short-term bump for Biden, just like we saw a short-term bump for Hillary Clinton right after the Access Hollywood tape. And it disappeared almost as quickly as that bump happened. So I ultimately think this is still going to be about the person that promises a better kind of change in their second term. And if talking about the trial is not a way to do that.
Mike, let me ask you about that in particular. Chuck makes a good point right now, right? And you and I have both been on the trail and you talk to voters there. Often the voters you meet at his events are the ones who support Joe Biden, but you go a few blocks away and you talk to some of these other voters right now, and they're not concerned about the sort of, message of the day. They want to know, hey, what's in it for me? How are you going to make the prices of my groceries cost less? How are you going to make it easier for me to buy a home or for my child to be able to afford moving out of the house right now? How do they get back to that message when the guy has not been successful in breaking through the noise of this season?
Every single demographic, every poll shows the number one issue, cost of living, inflation. And the Biden team has seemed to concede that there's nothing they're going to be able to do to fix the inflation problem. So they're trying to make this a whose side are you on, who are you fighting for question. The president may have some economic announcements to make over the course of the rest of the year to try to say we're bringing costs down, we're trying to forgive student loans, to put more money in your pocket. But the real contrast they're really hoping to seize on this trial, to the extent that they are, is he is only worried about his own interests, his own whether he's free or not, convicted or not, and the president is fighting for people, including the middle class where he grew up on. So they're trying to make it a stylistic whose side are you on argument.
Chuck, last thought, the next big shakeup moment is going to be this debate on June 27th here. The Biden campaign wanted this thing early because they needed to shake things up right now to try to find a way to break through. It is performative in a lot of ways here. How much does it matter?
Look, I think it matters to both of them at this point, right? You got to see, has Trump gotten over his grievance, right? There's a couple of ways this debate could go. Perhaps Biden is able to bait Trump into only talking about his legal problems. Perhaps Trump is able to bait Biden into sort of getting angry, and then they're just sitting there cursing at each other, right? And my great fear of this debate is for the country, that you do have these two guys start yelling at each other, perhaps cursing on national television, our two presidents for the first time, and all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of new Kennedy-curious voters. That could be the unintended consequence of this early debate, is that it gives a new opening to Kennedy to have a conversation with turned-off voters.
Yeah, as John Meacham said earlier, it has been Donald Trump who's on trial. Pretty soon it's America that's on trial. And Americans are going to have to render their verdict coming pretty soon on all of this. Chuck Todd, I appreciate you. Mike Memley, nice to see you in person. Appreciate your expertise on this historic week. And coming up right here, what is next for the former president legally? We're going to walk through the appeals process, what to expect from sentencing. And we'll have more, of course, with our legal experts. That's next. Plus, outrage and partisan pushback. As we mentioned, Donald Trump's defenders are working to flip the script on the former president's historic guilty verdict. My one-on-one interview with one of Mr. Trump's top congressional allies is straight ahead. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back to Meet the Press Now. As we have said, the sentencing for former President Trump is scheduled for July 11th. And after that, former President Trump and his legal team have made it clear that they plan to appeal his conviction. The former president reiterated that intent today while making false claims about the judge and about the trial.
So we're going to be appealing this scam. We're going to be appealing it on many different things. He wouldn't allow us to have witnesses. He wouldn't allow us to talk. He wouldn't allow us to do anything. The judge was a tyrant.
There are avenues for appeal, and defense attorney Todd Blanche has said the Judge Merchan not recusing himself is one item that they will bring up. But to be clear, the judge did not ban Mr. Trump's lawyers from calling witnesses or prevent them from talking, other than imposing a gag order that limited what Mr. Trump could say about witnesses, court officials, or jurors. He could say whatever he wanted about the judge. I'm joined now by former federal prosecutor Elise Adamson and former assistant Manhattan District Attorney Daniel Horowitz. Dan, let me get to you right away. Walk us through what happens between now and July 11th, the date of the scheduled sentencing.
Right. So some of it's very procedural, some of it's substantive. So what's going to happen is both sides are going to start preparing sentencing memorandum. And each side will prepare something for the judge to talk about what they think the sentence should be. And as part of that process, the defendant, Donald Trump, who's now convicted, is going to have to meet with the Department of Probation that will prepare a special report that the judge can use about his background and a variety of things that the judge will want to look at in considering what a sentence will be.
So he's one of the most familiar people in the planet right now. Does that process still need to take place?
Well, it has to take place because it's required by law. You're absolutely right. I said to somebody earlier today, it's hard to believe that there's any detail about Donald Trump's life that hasn't already been written about or covered. So my guess is that there's not going to be something that's going to be surprising in the report. What will be interesting, though, is that Donald Trump, as a convicted felon, has to meet with the Department of Probation. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. He can't get out of it. And it's an interview that in some ways is very routine and in some ways is very probing. But that's probably the most important thing that's going to take place between now and then. And then if Trump and his team think that there are grounds for post-trial motions, we know that the defendant already made a motion to set aside the jury's verdict, which Judge Merchan denied, but they may make additional motions, particularly given this defendant and how litigious he is.
Elise, let me ask you specifically about what the DA's decision is. Alvin Bragg has to make a choice. Is he going to go for jail time here as the sentence? The judge will have the final decision here. But first on jail time, and second, related to that, to the gag order violations, do they have any impact on this decision? I mean, there were fines, but Donald Trump attacked the judge, to say nothing of his family, the jurors, and key witnesses throughout this trial.
Yes, Peter, you're absolutely right. And I'll address that in a second because I think that's very significant. But to your first question, what is Alvin Bragg going to do? I think we all want to know, right? I think it's hard to imagine that they don't ask for jail time here. This is a Class E felony, which is a lower felony in the state of New York. However, the DA has really framed this as an election interference case. Now, I understand that he was convicted of a business falsification charge, 34 counts of it, mind you. But, you know, the underlying offense, that predicate offense that the jury also found, it was election interference, and that's very serious. And then we get into the gag order. Okay, any similarly situated defendant who is not Donald Trump, who violated a gag order 10 times and had two contempt findings against him, would have been stepped back into incarceration pending the trial, much less not put into jail after sentencing.
So those who complain that Donald Trump got an unfair shake here, your argument is he got a better than fair shake. Anybody else would have been treated more harshly than he was.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm very passionate on this point because I was a prosecutor for 7.5 years, and I asked for defendants to be put in jail for those very reasons. It's violation of judicial orders. And when we're talking about what his sentence could be, similarly situated defendants who have not violated gag orders for charges like this would usually get probation. How can we say he's a good candidate for probation? He is going to follow all of the conditions of probation if he can't follow conditions on pretrial release. So I think he's been treated very well and very different from other defendants.
Dan, Mr. Trump can't appeal his conviction until after the sentencing. What do you think are the best grounds, the best argument he has for an appeal?
Well, I think some of the things you heard him talk about today, I think that's great for a press conference, but I'm not sure that actually is going to carry the day for an appeal. He does have, an issue. Should the judge have allowed his expert to testify? I think that's probably not going to carry the day.
But to be clear, his expert, the campaign finance expert, was allowed to testify. The judge had just limited the scope of what he could testify about. So is that enough to carry water?
No, and I think that's a very important point because the judge didn't preclude any witnesses. He just limited the scope. I think what you're going to ultimately see in the appeal is, there was evidence that came in, and frankly, I don't think there are grounds for a successful appeal, but your question is, what do I think Trump is going to do on the appeal? If I was his lawyer, I would be focusing on the evidence that came in that's, if you would, potentially extraneous to the actual charges.
Stormy Daniels.
The story about Karen McDougal and the sort of the broader catch and kill issues. They'll argue that was not relevant to the charges, and they'll try to take a page out of the Harvey Weinstein playbook, because as you know, Harvey Weinstein's conviction was set aside by New York's highest court for doing exactly that, letting in too much extraneous evidence. Now, that was a very different case, and Judge Merchan tried a very tight case. But I do think that if they're gonna strike with a hot issue, it's gonna be this extraneous, purportedly irrelevant, overly prejudicial evidence that came in about Karen McDougal and the catch and kill scheme.
Elise, your thought on that? Best grounds for appeal were Donald Trump's team as they are planning to pursue.
Yeah, I think the Stormy Daniels testimony is a very
they barely
strong
objected,
area.
Or they didn't object.
I think part of that was gamesmanship, and I remember thinking at the time.
If they didn't object in the court hearing, do they have the same grounds for an appeal afterward?
Well, so ordinarily, if you don't object at all, then it's considered waived. However, they did object at some point, and then Judge Merchan overruled that objection, and then Susan Necheles stayed seated. I think she stayed seated for a reason, and that was so she could make this argument. Your Honor, we made a motion in limine to preclude this testimony. You ruled against us. Your Honor, I objected. You overruled.
The judge
so
himself
I let it
at
come
the end
in.
said you could have objected more often.
Right, exactly, which is why I think it's gamesmanship, because the more that came out of Stormy Daniels' mouth, the more the record was built to argue prejudice. I also think another grounds for appeal is the actual structure of the charges. This was a novel approach in how they charged the case, and I think we can expect to see them make a very technical argument on the structure, and then also not requiring unanimity on what that third crime was. And so I'm not sure it is going to be a successful challenge, but I think we're going to see it.
Last question, does this happen before Election Day? Is the appeal concluded before then?
I find it highly unlikely. Just takes too long. Appeals take several months, sometimes years, and he has to go through a 3-step process, right? He's going to go to the first judicial department. That's the first step in New York. If they affirm the conviction, he has to go to the New York State Court of Appeals.
To be clear, the reason this matters is that means that after sentencing, when it becomes official, he is a convicted felon going into the election with no appeal likely to occur before Election Day.
That is correct.
Elise Adamson, I appreciate your expertise. Dan Horowitz, I appreciate your being with us, my friend. Thank you so much. Coming up next right here, new reporting on what Donald Trump's unprecedented guilty verdict means for him, receiving intelligence briefings once he formally clinches the Republican nomination. But first, NBC News caught up with some voters in the critical swing state of Pennsylvania for their views on Mr. Trump's felony conviction.
It's a bunch of hooey. I said I'm going to vote for Trump either way.
I think it was rigged, the whole thing. I don't think he was, they didn't ever really have a crime for him. They just wanted him out.
To me, it's justice. It's obvious. This is how our judicial system works. And so I feel like I'm glad it's kind of over.
Welcome back. Donald Trump's conviction will not prevent him from running for president, and a U.S. official tells NBC News that the guilty verdict will also not affect plans for intelligence briefings for Mr. Trump either once he officially becomes the Republican nominee. Those intel briefings are not required by law for presidential nominees, but they have been a custom for more than 7 decades. And NBC News global security reporter Dan DeLuce is joining me now with the latest on this. Dan, this is a question a lot of Americans have been asking, not just about the intelligence briefings, but frankly about how you can be convicted and still be a candidate for president. So let's get to those intelligence briefings. When will they begin?
They usually begin after the party conventions are held. So the Republican convention's due to be held mid-July in Milwaukee. So shortly after that, that's when former President Trump would get his first intel briefing as the nominee, after being formally named the nominee. That's how they've done it in the past, going all the way back to 1952.
Are any of the briefing materials amended because of this conviction? Does anything change?
I think U.S. officials would say no. But what is true is that these are kind of limited intelligence briefings. This isn't the full serving that you get when you are actually in the White House. So they do not reveal sources, sensitive sources. They don't reveal methods, how intelligence has been gathered. It's more broad brush. It's more of an overall view of threats around the world, and the idea being that that's sufficient for a nominee. But of course, there still are sensitive things there that get briefed, and they will be watching, I think, the debates and public comments. They always do. And in past elections, there were kind of controversies about what different candidates said during the campaign or during a debate. And of course, Richard Nixon held a grudge for years against John F. Kennedy because he felt some of the information in the intel briefings was used to his advantage. And he claimed there was a missile gap and so on during the Cold War. So there is some room here for concern, but they are claiming that they are not going to somehow censor the intel briefing.
Yeah, and a good reminder that Donald Trump has also been indicted for a mishandling of classified documents, those documents that were later discovered at his Mar-a-Lago property in Florida. Dan DeLuce, my friend, thank you very much for your reporting. And coming up here after the break, Donald Trump and his allies take aim at the legal system and vow retribution after the historic guilty verdict. Republican Congressman Byron Donalds, one of former President Trump's most vocal supporters, will join me next. But first, NBC News caught up with some voters in battleground Georgia for their reactions to the hush money verdict hours after it came down.
Honestly, I'm not a bit surprised that he was convicted. I mean, honestly, what does it change? So many people are behind him. I don't see him losing regardless of the verdict.
Ethically, I would want to vote for a president that is ethically upright, and I can't say the same for either president right now, which makes me incredibly uncomfortable.
Welcome back. As we mentioned, former President Trump's allies are rallying to his defense after yesterday's historic guilty verdict. And now the Republican-led House Subcommittee on the Weaponization of Government is requesting the Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg and the prosecutor there, Matthew Colangelo, to testify before the committee. And joining me now is Florida Republican Congressman Byron Donalds, whose name has been reportedly on a short list for possible vice presidential picks for the former president. Congressman Donalds, I appreciate your being with here. Let me get right to that news. Your colleagues on the House Judiciary's Weaponization Committee are demanding Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg and prosecutor Matthew Colangelo testify in 2 weeks. Is it the place of Congress to be looking into state jury verdicts?
First of all, it's good to be with you. Number one, absolutely it is. We do send federal funds to local jurisdictions all across the country. Number two, it's Alvin Bragg who decided to reach into the federal jurisdiction in order to make these misdemeanors felonies. You got to remember the core of this argument is that that is dealing with the federal election of 2016. That is not the jurisdiction of a state prosecutor in Lower Manhattan. That is the jurisdiction of the Federal Election Commission.
But
a Federal Election Commission, by the way, that looked at this in 2018 and said there was nothing here.
But let me push back on that if I can. This case obviously was indicted by a state grand jury. It was decided by a Manhattan jury. The appeals process hasn't played out. Why not allow the appeals process, the way our system works, to be completed?
Because you got to understand, and let's just be real about this, the entire reason why these charges were brought now, why this case was brought now, was to interfere with the 2024 presidential election. It was to interfere. It was to trap Donald Trump in the courtroom.
Well,
that's the entire purpose.
No evidence that Joe
Everybody
Biden had any
knows.
involvement, obviously.
Are you going to let me finish, or are you going to talk over me?
No, I just wanted to make that pushback. I'm glad to listen.
Or you want to talk? Okay, let me talk. Here's the deal. Everybody knows that the appeals process is going to go well into 2025 after the election is over. Say what you will about the merits of the case. We have never in American history had prosecutions of the leading presidential candidate of any major party in the United States. This has never happened. So much so that Maine Justice, their own protocols are that they don't do this in the heat of a presidential election. But what we have seen out of the Department of Justice led by Merrick Garland, out of Alvin Bragg in Lower Manhattan, out of Fannie Willis in Georgia, is that they do not care about the norms of our election process.
They just want to get
Donald Trump.
You, but
so the Weaponization Committee does have a responsibility to investigate.
So respectfully, let me push back for a second, because it's the same Justice Department that you say has weaponized this right now, that as we speak is prosecuting the Democratic Senator from New Jersey, Robert Menendez. They're pursuing a case against the Democratic representative from Texas, Henry Cuellar. And beginning on Monday, they're going to be pursuing the start of a trial against the president's own son, Hunter Biden, on a gun charge. So how can it be both ways, where they're only pursuing this as a way to weaponize it when they're pursuing Democrats and Republicans?
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up. First of all, Bob Menendez, he had gold bars with his name engraved on them, and Bob Menendez is not running for president of the United States. Number two, Henry Cuellar is not running for president of the United States.
So it only matters because he's running for president of the United States. It doesn't matter below that highest office?
Of course, because you're interfering with a presidential election.
But what evidence is there that Joe Biden
you're
doesn't have any
interfering
control
with the presidential election? That's the issue here.
Joe Biden doesn't have any control over what the Manhattan DA does.
Matthew Colangelo was the number 3 guy at Maine Justice under Merrick Garland, who works for Joe Biden. He left there to go be a frontline prosecutor in Lower Manhattan. I mean, look, that right there demonstrates that you have some semblance of collusion, because never in the legal system, according to my knowledge, have you had somebody working at Maine Justice in the number 3 position leave to go be a frontline prosecutor on a case in New York City. Just happens to be the case of a former president who is the chief political rival of Joe Biden. So this stinks to high heaven. Everybody knows it stinks to high heaven. And that is why you have millions of people going to DonaldJTrump.com, supporting President Trump, donating to President Trump, wanting to volunteer for President Trump, because this is election interference and it is a political persecution of Joe Biden's political rival.
If President Trump wins his appeal, will you support that verdict?
Of course, because this case should have never been brought in the first place.
So if he loses his appeal, will you support that then?
This case should have never been brought in.
But you said you'll support it if he wins it, but you won't support it if he loses. I just want to be clear.
Oh, my gosh. You going to let me talk? Let me answer your question. You are talking about a federal crime that is never actually decided by the Federal Election Commission. They looked into this and they said there's nothing to see here. Alvin Bragg pulls it up as a state prosecutor outside of his jurisdiction and ties in some bookmaking charge that is long since past long past since when that charge was no longer allowed to be utilized in state court, all to twist it together in a legal theory to get felony convictions. Come on, man. This case is a joke. You know it. I know it. The American people know it.
Let me ask you. The president's son, Don Jr., said, quote, November 5th is going to be retribution. Do you agree with that? Is that the stakes of this election?
I think that November 5th, the American people are going to weigh in on exactly what they think has happened in Lower Manhattan, what they think Joe Biden has done in his job as president, because he's been the master of disaster. Everything has gone wrong under Joe Biden, and everybody knows it as well. And it's also going to be a demonstration that the American people want Donald Trump back in the White House, because when he was president of the United States, inflation was low, our border was secure, the world was much safer. Everything has gone wrong, and the Democrats who like to lecture everybody about wanting to save democracy, they are the ones who are destroying the institutions of our country. It's got to stop, and Donald Trump is the man to do it.
Donald Trump on the first day, the first official event of this new campaign season, said, "I am your retribution." Do you support that statement?
I do, and here's why. Because the American people have watched their cities be overrun by illegal aliens, which is a violation of federal immigration law. Joe Biden doesn't care. They've watched the price of everything in their home go up drastically because of Joe Biden's reckless spending, not caring about the welfare of the American people.
Why is that retribution? Isn't that policy differences? Sorry to interrupt you.
They watched 13 men and women die at Hamid Karzai International Airport, and when the bodies came back from Afghanistan, Joe Biden was busy looking at his watch, not caring about the disaster he caused on the withdrawal of Afghanistan. So yes, the American people have had enough. They want to fire Joe Biden, and they have every right to do so.
Let me ask you if I can. Will you commit to accepting the results of the 2024 election, no matter who wins?
First of all, I've answered this one before, but let's get to it.
Well,
if you have state and local agencies that actually follow election law and don't twist election procedures to suit their own interests, then of course. Secondarily, if you're going to have a presidential election under the stink of this lawfare, which is damaging the presidential election, it makes it very, very difficult, because normal people in our country are going to look at it and they're going to say the fix is in. The Democrats do not care about our election process. They just want to keep power and keep Joe Biden in the White House. It's disgusting.
If Donald Trump wins, you'll accept it, I trust, yeah?
Listen, like I said at the top, as long as all the election procedures are followed and we can get rid of this lawfare, I have no problem accepting the results of an election.
Let me ask you about your Republican colleague, J.D. Vance. He suggested that the daughter of Judge Juan Merchan should be subpoenaed. Should family members of public officials be considered fair game, Congressman?
If you're talking about the fact that the daughter of Judge Merchan is making millions of dollars helping Democrats raise money online, and that very fact has caused her dad to have a vested interest in supporting a conviction of President Trump, then yes, she should. Because her influence with her father is one of the core reasons why I believe this case is going to be overturned. Because Juan Merchan, under New York State ethics, should have recused himself because he has a bias against Donald Trump.
And to be clear, by that same logic, then, isn't the backlash against Justices Alito and Clarence Thomas for the actions of their wives reasonable?
As far as I remember, Justice Alito's wife flew a flag. That's not making money. So I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, it's not a question about whether she flew a flag or not. She flew multiple flags. One of them's associated with Christian nationalism.
Flying a flag is not making money, sir. Flying a flag is allowed in the United States of America.
Sir, let me just finish. We'll each get a chance to talk.
What you're trying to do is weaponize this stuff against Judge Alito.
Let me just ask the question, then you can answer. I'm glad to listen. To be clear, she flew two flags, both of which were associated with January 6th rioters at the Capitol. So in much the same way, whether there's money involved or not, doesn't that also potentially affect the position of, in this case, her husband, and in the other cases, you say, the daughter of a judge?
No, it does not, and you know better than that. You're allowed to fly a flag like you're allowed to speak your mind. That does not mean that the judge is all of a sudden is tainted, but when the family is making money off of the actual trial that Judge Merchan is dealing with right now, that is an ethical issue, and he should have recused himself before the trial even started.
We'll let viewers make their own judgment. Congressman Byron Donalds, I appreciate your conversation. Apologize for any interruptions. It's important that we answer these questions. Thanks for making time to speak with me. I do want to get down to digesting all this with our panel. Peter Baker, Chief White House Correspondent for the New York Times and an NBC News. Political analyst Donna Edwards, former Democratic Congresswoman from Maryland and an NBC News political analyst. And Mark Lauder, former former director of strategic communications for the Trump 2020 re-election campaign. They all join us here. Peter, you just heard. I want to get your initial reactions to the congressman here, the biggest takeaways from his remarks there, echoing a lot of the thoughts we've heard from former President Trump, as he repeated earlier today.
Yeah, obviously the strategy here, and it's orchestrated, is to try to discredit the system and to discredit the prosecution so that at least the people who support Donald Trump have something to talk about other than whatever the substance of the allegations that are now, the subject of 34 convictions. This is a standard, tactic by anybody who's convicted in a court of law. He will have his chance to appeal it, obviously, and try to make a lot of the arguments that the congressman just made there. But as a matter of politics, it's about speaking to that base. It's about speaking to those Trump supporters, saying, don't leave him just because of this conviction. It's not fair. Don't take it seriously. It's not something you should be concerned about.
Mark, is this the most effective strategy for former President Trump today? We heard him, a lot of grievances, a lot of the complaints he has made that we've heard before at political rallies and elsewhere here. The base is behind him. They've been juiced by this. We get it. But at the end of the day, this thing's decided on the margins, and most Americans aren't focused on his grievances. They're focused on their own.
Well, that's, I think, where what he's actually tiptoeing that line. When you look at the fact that they raised $35 million online, largest ever one-day total, and 30% of those voters were first-time donors, brand new donors, shows to me that people who may have supported him but didn't make a financial contribution felt motivated to do so. And I think on the other issues, these verdicts don't change the price of gas, the price of groceries. It doesn't secure the border.
So isn't that a more effective conversation for him to be hitting the price of gas, stand in front of a gas station, instead of by railing against a judge in a case in New York City? No?
Well, we're still 5 months away from the election, so he gets to do both. Right now, we're in the moment. He's obviously seizing that. People still know the gas prices. They still know the immigration problems. And so I think what he's doing now is capturing that energy. He's obviously bringing new people in as donors and volunteers, and then he can translate that into the real issues, because those aren't going to change regardless of this verdict.
Donna, let me ask you your thoughts on what you heard from the Republican congressman.
Well, no surprise that just like Donald Trump, he's echoing the same things where, if you win, then it's good, and if you lose, then it's bad. And so that doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, it's really sad because it's a comment on our system.
Well, it was striking to me when I asked him about Menendez and asked him about Cuellar. He said, well, they're not running for president, so it's different. I mean, at the end of the day...
Doesn't matter.
You're an American.
You asked about that. You asked about the dichotomy with Alito and... in
Clarence
these cases,
Thomas and the daughter
Clarence
of
Thomas,
LaShawn.
and it doesn't matter to them. I mean, they don't really care about those differences. And I think the American people are going to have to judge for themselves as they will. I don't think that the verdict yesterday really changes a lot of hearts and minds. There are those slice of people in the middle who are going to make a decision about this election. And those are the people that I think both Donald Trump and Joe Biden have to win over in order to win their race.
Yeah, well, I think we all agree on that. In fact, Joe Biden and Donald Trump agree on that, right? That's the one thing they agree on. This thing gets resolved on November 5th here. I want to ask you, though, Mark, about Donald Trump, right? He was impeached twice. He lost his re-election campaign. He cost Republicans the House in 2018. A lot of the candidates that he backed in 2022, they also lost their races. Why are Republicans so behind Donald Trump after so many losses?
Well, I think you see the millions of people. I mean, this is a president who increased his vote total from 2016 to 2020 by millions. But he's still, as the incumbent president, has the most votes of an incumbent president by anyone ever. You see the energy behind him. You see the fact that he's leading in the polls right now. And I know it's not election day yet, but I do think it's important to note there's not one day in 2019 or 2020, even before the pandemic, that Donald Trump was leading Joe Biden in the Real Clear Politics average. He's been leading him every day since
Let's
September.
be clear, it is trending in his favor right now.
Yeah.
You look at these things, we give you a poll in the morning, sometimes you're like, well, what does that mean? If you look over a broad horizon right now, he has been growing his number, and it may be higher than 47%, which had been a ceiling. So that's something certainly the Biden campaign has to be noting right now. Peter, what is the Biden campaign not doing to this point? I was struck by the Robert De Niro moment earlier this week, right? They'd been so disciplined, at least to, use a word they would like to use in this situation, that all of a sudden they put out two of the police officers who were attacked at the Capitol, who have very powerful stories, and Robert De Niro as well. And it felt in some ways to critics like they were just joining the circus here. What is the best strategy for the Biden folks going forward to break through?
Yeah, I mean, up until the last few weeks, basically, the rule had been don't touch it. Don't get anywhere near it. You don't want to do anything to fuel the the conspiracy theory that former President Trump puts out there, that this is all about White House machinations, so the president doesn't say anything about it. But you saw a shift, not only in the last few weeks where they were kind of inching up to it, with the president mocking Trump for falling asleep in court and for sending Robert De Niro. Today, of course, he went out in front of the cameras and gave a pretty full, straightforward, condemnation of the former president. He says he was found guilty in a fair trial of 34 counts, and he said it was reckless and dangerous for Republicans to try to discredit the justice system just because they didn't like the verdict. He hasn't done that before. He's decided, obviously, that the conviction yesterday is a new phase, and he now feels free to go ahead and have at least some comment on it. They're not going to continue that, I don't think. They'll tell you that they're not planning to run ads on it. They're not going to back out of the debate saying it's unseemly for a president
If you
to get
care
on
about
stage
democracy,
with a film.
presumably you're already in Biden's camp on this thing, right? There's some other issues that affect those more independent-minded voters.
I mean, the real voters who matter here are those who voted against Trump and for Biden 4 years ago, but are disenchanted with Biden because of inflation, because of his age, because of immigration, or what have you. And can he get them back? It doesn't seem likely that they're likely to go to Trump, but they might stay home. They might vote for third-party candidates. They might not vote for Biden. And so those are the people that Biden is focused on.
Donna, let me ask you if I can, Congresswoman Edwards, here, excuse my casualness in this conversation on a Friday afternoon. I want to turn to your home state, Larry Hogan, the Republican there. He's running for the open Senate seat in the state. He urged people to respect the verdict and the legal process. And then in response, a Trump campaign advisor, one of the top members of the team, tweeted, "You just ended your campaign." How does Larry Hogan navigate these waters right now, where he is the furthest thing from a MAGA Republican and maybe his biggest advantage, I guess, in the state of Maryland?
Well, what we've seen over the last couple of weeks with Larry Hogan is that he navigates it by, going, full on in support of abortion rights. And then now this statement against Donald Trump. Look, I don't think that there are a slew of MAGA voters in Maryland. And so this was probably a good state call for Larry Hogan, where it's not something that would necessarily work in other places around the country. And I think we're going to have to see. I mean, the more that Donald Trump attacks Larry Hogan, I think, that could actually pay off for Hogan in Maryland.
Yeah, with a lot of independent-minded voters in that state.
But we got a lot of Democrats, too.
Yeah, no doubt, certainly, as you know well in that state. Mark, if I can, so the next big date that we're going to look to is June 27th. That's the first of two debates. There are only so many moments that shake this thing up, or potentially in the Biden campaign's world, crystallize things. Their concern is that most Americans didn't even really believe yet that Donald Trump would be the nominee. They want them to see the two and say, hey, this is your choice. It's me or the other guy here. What does Donald Trump need to do there? He keeps building, sort of whacking at Joe Biden, saying this guy can barely stand for an hour and a half. Is that the best strategy moving forward?
Well, I think, obviously, as long as he stays on the policy, he can compare records every day with Joe Biden, and he wins.
You say stay on the policy. He's barely been on the policy.
Well, focus on the results. Focus on the results. Focus on gas, immigration, grocery prices. And the challenge is going to be, when Joe Biden fumbles or stumbles, and how do you react? Because that's why I believe this is a Hail Mary by the Biden campaign to try to change the narrative, because we all saw the interview a few weeks ago with Aaron Burnett. There's no teleprompter in a debate, and you cannot freeze. There's no editing, and we will see right on stage whether your uncle was eaten by cannibals, whether you've drove a semi-truck, and you've got to create an answer in 2 minutes.
We'll let them litigate everything, including cannibalization, at that debate on June 27th. Mark, Donna, thank you. We'll see you Monday with more Meet the Press Now. If it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press on your local NBC News station. We will see you then. Tom Cotton, Cy Vance, Hakeem Jeffries all join us. Don't miss it. The news continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app, or follow us on social media.